This one simple piece of camera gear is going to act like Photoshop inside your camera. It's going to make the skies look better, skin tones look better, and it'll help with reflections. This piece of gear I'm talking about is a polarizing filter. A polarizing filter just takes polarizing light and redirects it. You've probably heard of diffusion filters, which scatters the light in multiple directions, but a polarizing filter strengthens the light into parallel planes in which the light vibrates in the same direction. When light reflects from surfaces like glass or water, it becomes polarized. But a polarizing filter, when it's correctly positioned, can stop the polarizing light. The filter will pass previously unpolarized light and polarize it in the process. And then that light will be the image that reaches your camera sensor. It's important to know that there's different types of polarizing filters that you can get. For instance, I have this one here, which is a circular polarizing filter. And honestly, you really wouldn't know the difference between this and a linear polarizing filter. And the main reason is you would think that circular polarizing would just mean because it's a circle or because you can rotate it on your camera lens. It's actually because a linear polarizing filter is just a regular polarizing filter, but with older cameras, it really hurt with the autofocus and the metering on it. So they made circular polarizing filters so it can be used on those types of cameras. However, with our new mirrorless cameras, you can actually go with a linear polarizing filter, and that is a cheaper option, but I like to get circular polarizing filters just in case, and they're also known by a CPL filter. Now that we know what this filter is and how it functions, I'm going to tell you how you can get the best result using one of these. If you're filming a reflective surface like water or glass, you're going to have the best results at around 34 degrees, but if you're doing it head on, like at 90 degrees of that surface, it's going to have little to no effect when using this polarizing filter. So that logic can also be said with the sky.
So this is a test with the 55mm, stop down to f10, ISO 100, no CPL, put that on there. CPL is on, and then I'm going to close it down. Look at that! The sky just becomes so much more blue.
When you're filming directly at the sun, it's going to have no effect. Then if you turn the camera about 90 degrees away from the sun, it's going to start having an effect. And if you go a full 180 directly opposite of the sun, it's going to have a little bit of effect, almost no effect. It'll be very, very faint to see.
If I twist around, I'm not adjusting the CPL, but you can see the closer we get to the sun, the more it doesn't have an effect. But when we get away from the sun, it starts to help with that light. As long as you're at a 90-degree angle from the sun, then it pretty much makes a difference.
But when doing this, it really helps saturate that nice blue sky. But do be careful, because depending if the sky is already pretty blue out there, it can almost look black if you go too dark on the polarizing filter.
Go down really dark.
Another thing to remember if you're wanting to use a polarizing filter while shooting a lot of the sky is to not use any lens wider than about a 35mm. When using something wider than that, you're going to start seeing some weird crossing or vignetting sort of in the middle of the image, where you can see where the polarizing filter has the most effect on the sky. Because you're going so wide, you're starting to get the different degrees of the sky I was talking about earlier, where you have better and worse results.
We're going to switch to our wide angle lens. And the great thing with this is already at a 77mm thread, so you can just take this right off, put it on. And I am on the Laowa 15mm. So the reason you don't want to use a CPL on a wide angle, especially anything wider than a 35, is that it starts introducing this weird vignetting kind of crossing over through the horizon where the sun meets on each side.
Other benefits to using a polarizing filter outside is that it can help with cutting through haze, and if it happens to be a day where a rainbow's out, it can help with saturating that rainbow to be a lot more vibrant. And obviously, if you're out at a lake, you can see through the water a lot more clearly.
And here we are with murky water, rotating the filter. Start to see everything under the water.
But do be careful, because if you turn it all the way where it has a maximum strength on the water, it can almost be completely invisible, having no reflections on top, so it's kind of hard to determine if you're actually looking at water sometimes.
CPL off. Turning CPL on.
The other great use case for this is if you're someone that is filming cars or anything with a lot of windows like buildings. Especially if you're working on a narrative piece where you have someone in the car and you want to be able to see their face a lot more clearly through a windshield, using a polarizing filter is definitely going to help you with this. You don't have to stick with using polarizing filters outside, they also have a lot of benefit indoors. One of these cases would be if you're filming a phone. If you have your talent that's using a phone and they're scrolling through, you don't want to really see the reflections of your studio lights around, and using a polarizing filter will help cut down on those reflections. Another great use case is using these on an LCD monitor. Maybe you're filming a commercial and it's in an office space and they don't want the client's personal information being shown on camera. You can use the polarizing filter to darken the LCD screen, and in some cases you can get it to look pretty much black as if the screen's been turned off. One of my favorite use cases for using a polarizing filter is with people. For one, people with oily skin, like I actually am using one right now. If I dial this down, you can see the reflection right here get a lot stronger. And then if I turn it back, it starts to fade away.
There's the highlights with the filter open. And then now the skin highlights, the filter closing down.
Using this is almost like having a beauty filter built in. And another thing you can use polarizing filters for on people is glasses. So if you have talent that's wearing glasses and you don't want to be able to see the reflections in there, you can always use one of these and dial back the intensity of the reflections. Just like that. So cool. Let's talk about some of the ways that you can improve the results from using a polarizing filter. Because the filter actually rotates, it's almost like a dial of how much strength you want to use on this. So that really helps whenever you want to actually sell the look of it looking realistic, because in real life there are reflections of light everywhere. You don't want to get rid of them completely, so being able to adjust how much of a polarization effect you have going on is really beneficial. One of the weirdest things about polarizing filters is they don't actually work on metal surfaces. But there's one technique I actually found in this old cinematography book that I picked up from like the 1970s, is that if you have two polarizing filters, you can put one filter obviously on your camera lens and the other filter over the main light that you have shining on the object. Of course, depending on the size of your light, it may be a little difficult to actually accomplish this, but it is something kind of cool that you can actually get to work with reflections on metal. Speaking of filter sizes, I recommend getting the biggest size that you can and then getting some step up or step down rings so that you can adapt it to any lens that you have. There's different types of step up rings that you can get. So for instance, these ones that I have are pretty much just incremental for all the different filter threads. But as you can see, it has this kind of cone shape that it starts making, so it separates the lens a lot from the filter, and that can increase a lot of flaring that's going on in the lens. Depending on how many lenses you have, I would actually suggest getting one of these step-up rings that just goes from one size to the one you need for your filter. That way you don't have to go through and put on like 5 or 6 of these other rings. You just have one that you need for all your filters. Doing this will save you a lot of money, so you don't end up spending money on each individual size filter that you need. Another thing that can tend to happen with having another piece of glass over your lens is having a lot of different lens flares going on. This matte box I got is from Small Rig and it's pretty inexpensive. It allows you to have circular threaded on filters, but it also has an area to have drop-in square rectangular filters as well, which obviously you can pick up one of those. I just prefer having the threaded on filters.
Now we can add the matte box. Like that. Twist it on. And open it up. But not only does this help with glare from the sun, it makes it look way more professional and you can charge more. I will say it is harder to move this thing.
If you're someone that makes product videos and you have a product that obviously has a lot of reflections and a tabletop that has a lot of reflections, you're going to notice that when you're using that polarizing filter, it's only going to benefit one of the two sources of the reflection. So either the product or the table. And that's something to kind of keep in mind whenever you're using this polarizing filter. So the easiest way around that I can think of is obviously keeping the camera on a tripod and just changing what the polarizing filter is affecting and then going back in post and copying that together. Also, if you're wanting to polarize different subjects while you're filming, you want to remember that if you're racking focus or changing the camera's perspective to go from one subject to another, then you're going to have to adjust that polarizing filter as well, because most likely it's not going to have an effect like it did on the first subject. So this can get really tricky, but obviously if you're adjusting the filter while you're moving the camera, that's going to help you a lot with it. But it's also going to be very, very difficult. So I don't really recommend trying to accomplish this, but if you do, just keep that in mind. You're going to be moving that filter a lot. When you're using a polarizing filter, because you're redirecting light rays, it's automatically going to make your image a little bit darker. And it's usually not too drastic of a difference, around one stop of light, but that's just something to keep in mind whenever you are using one of these, especially in low light conditions. What brand do I recommend? Honestly, it's whatever would work best for you and your budget. I just get the K&F Concepts. I like their filters. They're not too expensive. They're not the cheapest at the same time. Honestly, you don't have to go out and get those multiple $100 filters. Getting one of the $50 or $25 filters will be just good enough. However, you are someone that is worried about the quality of the filters, I will say with polarizing filters, some of them may get a little bit of vignetting around the corners of the image. I personally haven't had this happen with any of the filters I've used, but that's usually due to the thickness of the filter itself. So you can look for thinner polarizing filters, and that will help with that vignetting if that is something that you're worried about. Like I said earlier about the water and having reflections, that in real life we have reflections, you want to keep that in mind. So I wouldn't recommend actually using a polarizing filter for every single shot, every single scene, every single subject, because then everything is just going to be flat all the time, and you want to keep that 3D dimensionality. You want to use this polarizing filter to your advantage as a storyteller.